Today is the 12th of March, 2024. I tend to avoid the date of writing as, unfortunate as it may be, I have a tendency to procrastinate on these projects. Days, weeks, months go by without any activity. I'll have the script half written in April, finish it off in June, start editing in July and have the video out by January if I'm lucky. I suspect I have ADHD, but in a twisted irony, I keep putting off seeing my GP about it. It's important that I date this video, however.
Here I am, finally ready to make a start on the script after some difficulty finding the motivation to finish a short book for research. My notes on my left monitor, the blank draft I'm typing on now positioned in the centre, and on my right, I type into Google, Paul Alexander. This man became an inspiration to me during my research for this video, so you can imagine my shock when I read his date of death on the Wikipedia page. March 11th, 2024. At age 78 and still suffering the long-term effects of polio, I had considered this was a possibility, that he could pass away while I was still working on the video. A morbid thought, but one I couldn't help but ponder. Yet, I felt truly stunned to read those words. I watched as the article transformed in real time. Every hour, a new update. Paul Alexander is morphed into Paul Alexander was. He was added to a page titled Deaths in 2024, alongside Giuseppe Granierim, an Italian essayist I'd never heard of. What had been a cursory search to use as reference material had turned into something far more sinister. This was no longer a simple musing, it was reality. While I was initially bereft of words, desperately tossing search terms into the void of Google and Twitter to dredge up any concrete details on his death, thinking there had potentially been some misunderstanding, I soon came to terms with the loss. While his passing saddened me greatly, it's helpful to remember that Paul's life served a immeasurable purpose, uplifting myself and others with his indomitable penchant to fight against his demons. Even after death, I expect Paul's story to touch so many more than it has already, and I hope I can serve as an additional conduit for that tale to reach the world. The reason I discovered Paul Alexander isn't all that orthodox though. It was only in my research for a video on one of 2022's breakout indie horror games that his existence became known to me, setting me down a road to unearth far more than I could have ever conceived of. This flipped my perception of that game on its head, and in this essay, I seek to explore that fresh understanding with you. In addition, I now believe it's my duty to eulogize an incredible man who defined how we should live our lives, irrespective of personal setbacks. Somehow, this is another video essay about Iron Lung. I remember hearing rumblings of this little horror game going by the name of Iron Lung, released on the 10th of March 2022. It was inexpensive, so shortly after release, I popped it into my Steam library and promptly forgot about it. It wasn't until a cozy night at home during July of the following year that I finally decided to give it a crack. I crawled into bed, booted up my Steam Deck, and savoured the game the way I imagine it was meant to be played, enveloped in total darkness. What I would then endure was a palpable, intense, and continued sense of dread that would only continue to build over the brief hour-long play session. With a short playtime, you're able to curate an experience to a minute degree. Every detail can be tailored to your liking, and every moment of gameplay can provide something new to do. Iron Lung achieves horror through absence. It's the space between each encounter that builds your anxiety. The entire game takes place in a single room, the hull of the SM-13, a submersible ship designed to survey shallow alien waters. As the opening text describes, this ship was not intended for use at this depth. You are totally welded inside this machine, and you observe as the porthole is covered. This is the final time you will ever see the outside world with your own eyes. A terminal on the sub allows you to query various terms, such as the SM-13 or the Quiet Rapture. One day, everything vanished.
All known planets with sentient life, flora and fauna, a habitable atmosphere, or any sort of natural resources were likewise gone, along with all known stars.
This occurrence goes totally unexplained, which is another common tactic that the game employs to keep you afraid. It capitalizes on our fear of the unknown. If you hear an unfamiliar noise in the middle of the night, your mind may wander into some dark places. It was probably just something outside being knocked over by a strong gust of wind. Or maybe you have a pet that's shuffling around at 3 AM. Or perhaps it's something far worse than that. Some people rationalize the unknown better than others, but I am not one of those people. I maintain a calm and collected demeanor around others, but you put me in this situation while I'm the only one at home, and I freeze up, my imagination buzzing with the most grave conclusions it can muster. Iron Lung takes place in a blood ocean situated on the moon AT5. They don't just call it a blood ocean because the water is red. This is real human blood, but little else is known about its origin. Your job is to investigate this region, take a picture of some anomalies that have been detected, and, should you succeed, you will be free. Likely with your only options being to go on this dangerous expedition into the unknown, or perish slowly in captivity. Once you reach the depths, you must navigate the ocean using the console's coordinates and a supplied map for reference. You may not be able to look out of a window, but the front-facing camera does allow for some form of visualization of the waters surrounding you. The genius of Iron Lung is in this redaction of information. Its creator, David Zemansky, is no stranger to game development, and it's pretty clear that few of his projects receive extensive development periods, i.e. more than a year. In 2022 alone, 3 titles that David worked on were released, including Iron Lung. You've probably heard limitations breed creativity, or something along those lines, and I've yet to play another game that encapsulates this concept as well as this. David has stripped away the visual aspect of his world and its inhabitants, demanding the player to fill in the gaps themselves. This is the essential basis of Lovecraftian horror, which Wikipedia describes as a subgenre of horror fiction and weird fiction that emphasizes the horror of the unknowable and incomprehensible. When you begin to depict these threats with visuals, they actually become less scary. The unknowable is suddenly known, and David uses this fact to his advantage. By alerting your brain with odd sounds, he forces you to picture the scariest creature imaginable, without having to lift even a pinky finger rendering it out. In some ways, Iron Lung feels like a blank slate for the player to paint their thoughts onto. I have to imagine that's why the game spawns so much discussion, a mix of positive and negative. The experience won't click with everyone because it requires you to pour so much of yourself into it. Yet, one area the game couldn't live up to interpretation is actually its title. Why on earth is it called Iron Lung? An iron lung is a piece of medical technology designed to help patients who have lost the ability to breathe. I had simply intended to figure out more about the device and discuss how it related to the game of the same name, but, as usual, I got more than a little sidetracked. When you search up Iron Lung, you'll probably run into an article about Paul Alexander. At the age of 6, Paul contracted poliomyelitis, or polio as I'll be referring to it henceforth. This disease ran rampant during the 20th century, with 1952 being the year the virus left its haunting mark on the United States. In July of this year, Paul would become well acquainted with the invisible demon, returning from play outside with a temperature surpassing 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Without converting that to Celsius, even I can tell you that's blisteringly hot. His mother feared the worst. The polio epidemic was hardly a secret, and every parent in the nation was wary that their children might make contact with the menace. Paul was whisked away to hospital, joining the bloating mass of patients that had met the peril sooner than him. While the fatality rate was only around 5%, another 35% or so were left with some form of paralysis. Paul had been unlucky to initially contract illness, even unluckier so to be left in the state he was. His mother recounts the experience in the foreword to 3 Minutes for a Dog, Paul Alexander's autobiography.
The doctors told us Paul could not possibly live.
The beginning of this book is a harrowing read. A man recounting how he was forced to grapple with his own mortality before he'd moved out of his parents' home, before he'd learned how to drive, before he'd even hit puberty. He had to confront the chance, the near certainty, that he'd be buried numerous years before his parents. This was an inevitability he had to accept. But you already know he didn't. Paul Alexander passed away peacefully in the company of his brother, having lived a life full of laughter, love, and loss. He was 78 years old. Paul Alexander had the opportunity to become romantically intimate with multiple partners, serve countless clients as a lawyer in Dallas, and even write a book. You'd be forgiven for thinking that, by some miracle, Paul Alexander had survived polio unscathed. You'd be wrong, of course, as like a piranha that had gotten the first taste of blood, polio would gnaw at the youth's heels for as long as he lived. The other major character in this story is Paul's Old Iron Horse, a title lovingly attached to his trusty iron lung, an obsolete piece of technology by today's standards, thankfully owed to medical advancements that led to the near total eradication of the polio virus. The iron lung took the form of a large metal box that would essentially breathe for its occupant. Various designs exist, with some looking far more frightening than others. When I take a moment to consider what this piece of technology is doing, I'm a little astounded. As a species, we've constantly created and iterated. Humanity's continuous research into saving the lives of just about anyone is a marvelous symbol of our ability to defy the odds. Polio was manufactured by nature to destroy, yet we've studied it, slowed it down, and utterly stomped it, leaving the virus a husk of its former notoriety. Paul Alexander epitomizes this fighting spirit, never giving up on life whilst continuing to pursue his dreams. For 72 years, he lived encumbered by polio, utterly paralyzed from the head down. It never broke him though. Paul Alexander was not just lucky. He made decisions and worked tirelessly to carve out a place for himself and his old iron horse in the world. A place which you could argue previously did not exist. Reading his book, I was floored by how many instances where he brushed past death, or others where he broke out of shackles that were determined to doom him to mediocrity.
If I had known the complex totality of the journey ahead in my life with its maze of unanswered questions, I might have been stricken with such insurmountable doubt of my abilities and mistrust in God that perhaps I would have given up under the sorrow rather than rise to the challenge of defeat and hopelessness and establish greatness.
What Paul Alexander had was his faith in God and caring parents which fostered his tenacity to come. It was not by some miracle that Paul Alexander survived longer than anyone could have predicted. It was his own resolve that pried open the door to life which was closing before him so suddenly. Iron Lung's namesake is the ship it takes place on, the SM-13, also known as the Iron Lung. Initially, I wasn't quite sure this title worked. It's very possible that the name is shared due simply to the fact that these submarines, as well as iron lungs of the real world, effectively serve as coffins to many that enter, as morbid as that may sound. You can find a note on the floor of the ship that says the following:
"This is not an expedition, it is an execution. When they put you in here, they don't want you to return."
The second chapter of Paul's book echoes this sentiment somewhat. He explains that patients were often neglected due to the sheer quantity of cases doctors had to contend with.
The doctor told the nurse that I was going to die very soon, and they should not worry about taking care from other patients to waste time on me.
What makes this voyage distinct is the unique circumstances behind it.
If they send the SM-8 down, one of the scientists is piloting and they all expect them to return. And now the SM-8 is in the blood ocean in pieces. I know you're next in line for realization in the Iron Lung, and usually that means you won't be seeing the stars again. But they don't have an SM-8 anymore. They have 3 burner subs and a lot of curiosity about AT-5. And maybe that means you have a chance.
The faintest glimmer of hope makes your survival realistic and worth plugging away at. One by one, you check off objectives on your map, slowly coming to terms with how to navigate this eccentric sub. The photos you take are processed for a moment before being displayed on the ship's rear monitor. It's tough to make anything out, but you get some glimpses of life that has ceased to exist beneath the moon's surface. The way this camera scares you is devious. You'll hear sounds from outside the ship, but whatever made the noise is gone before you can snap a pic. Even later, you'll be stopped dead in your tracks, unable to move forward any further. A photo reveals the eye of a beast, staring right through you before receding into the depths. The final stretch of the game is heart-pounding, with the SM-13 practically collapsing in on itself. A fire breaks out, blood begins to seep in, the oxygen on board is gradually being depleted. By the time you reach the last destination, you're racing to get the shot. You've dug your way out of this humongous hole, and the final step is to climb out. And in an instant, the light you finally saw is snatched away, as the hull of the Iron Lung becomes your tomb. I've swayed back and forth on this ending. A jump scare feels cheap here, and seeing the creature that's been hunting you robs the game of its mystique. Part of me still believes this, but another part of me understands the abrupt nature of your death. Despite everything you worked towards, this mission was doomed to fail. The moment you step foot in the Iron Lung, your fate is sealed, and no level of perseverance can overcome that awful truth. Iron Lung depicts a bleak future. A universe slowly dwindling into nothing, with the few remnants of life that remain failing to prevent their inevitable destiny. My interpretation of this ending was initially nihilistic, as it highlights the futility of sustained efforts against insurmountable odds as naive and pointless. As I'm fond of a comparison to Greek mythology, it's like Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill, only for it to tumble back down, leaving him back where he started, only to try again, and again, and again. After the short credits sequence, the game spells this out. The expedition ultimately raised more questions than answers. It was Paul Alexander who reshaped my perspective on Iron Lung. A man who refused to die, refused to let any handicap stop him from not only surviving, but thriving. While Iron Lung presented me with a reality that many would interpret as unsalvageable, I've chosen instead to focus on the minuscule chance of success that still glimmered among the dark, dark cosmos. And the game isn't ignorant to this either. The stars shine pale as bones, the moon is a lifeless corpse, its ocean a gaping wound. The universe, what's left of it, is dying. But somewhere in the void, there must be hope. The Iron Lung works as a metaphor. I myself am burdened by constrictive anxiety, chronic pains that shoot through my body at seemingly random intervals, as well as some fault in my brain that refuses to let me work on things when I want to. As I noted in the beginning, I wrote the intro for the script in March of 2024, and over a year later, the video is finally complete. These burdens are my Iron Lung. Paul Alexander's story, then, fills me with optimism. If someone like that can overcome not only a metaphorical Iron Lung, but a literal one, why on earth should I give up?
To fall short or fail in my endeavor would mean permanent dependency and a slow, torturous death for me. I could never give up the fight against polio or anything else that would restrain or inhibit my freedom to create and the power to give that creation life.
As long as you're still alive, maybe there's a chance. You just have to keep trying. Rest in peace, Paul.